Welcome back. Welcome back. And we're moving now into our third and final conversation for the morning. We've been talking about the week of activities here at the meetings, the opportunities for investment. And coming up, it's actually the Bonn Challenge. This one is a panel discussion.
Yes.
We've got the folks in to talk to us about it. We've got actually Wilber Sabido, who is the Chief Forest Officer, in with us. We also have Rene, Zamora, Forest Economist, Initiative 2020 Coordinator. And also we have Dr. Colin Young, Executive Director of 5Cs.
Good morning.
Gentlemen, good morning and welcome.
Good morning, good morning.
It is a lovely morning, I could tell you that much. We are in La Isla Bonita, San Pedro, right here at the properties of Grand Caribe. Very important to note, the meetings for this week and going to last throughout the weekend as well. We need to get to that Bonn Challenge though. Let's start with Wilber Sabido, Chief Forest Officer. Once again, good morning and welcome. Sir, talk to us.
Thank you, John and April. First of all, thanks for having us. And really, I don't think we couldn't be in a better place in San Pedro. So you asked about the Bonn Challenge. In the previous segments,
we've been hearing about it and talking about it.
That some of the panelists have been talking about the Bonn Challenge. But what it is, really, it's a global initiative that was initiated by the German government. And this was really in response to a convention that we're signatory to, the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. And really, it was a call to action at the time in 2011 when we saw that the decline in forest cover, the impacts of climate change were more and more visible. And so it was felt at the time that it is important to have a call to action of all the governments, all the signatories to the convention. And so the German government basically put forward what is called the Bonn Challenge. And it's called the Bonn Challenge because it was actually initiated in Bonn, in Germany. And the initial pledge or challenge was that let's restore 150 million hectares globally by 2020. At the time of, and up to 2020, we were able to reach close to the goal. And so we said, why not pledge further? And so the new challenge that was put out there was 350 million hectares globally. And so in response to that, countries such as Belize essentially commit in certain instances based on just the pervading circumstances in each country in terms of what they feel that they can restore in terms of degraded landscapes, degraded ecosystems. And in the case of Belize, we until 2021 were able to develop the National Landscape Restoration Strategy, which is in fact a response to the Bonn Challenge. And so the Bonn Challenge is really a global initiative, and as Rene will explain later, the initiative 20 by 20 is the region's response to the Bonn Challenge. So in the case of Belize, we are planning strategically, locally, by involving many stakeholders that have anything to do with impacting the environment, the agroproductive landscape especially, and more importantly, the agroproductive sector, the agricultural sector. Whether it be large producers, small producers, everyone has a part to play in terms of ensuring that the ecosystem's resiliency to climate change impacts, right, to natural disasters, that we are in a position to be able to bounce back. And truth be told, during the COVID pandemic, it was shown that our ecosystems are resilient once they're given an opportunity, if we can put it that way, to be able to recuperate naturally.
Once we leave them alone.
I like that you went there simply because it was noticed that exactly during the COVID pandemic that we saw the vibrancy of the ecosystem started to come back following that, and being that we noticed that it needed time to be restored, will there be anything in place to say, you know what, we need to extend, especially that things are, let's say, back to normal? Will there anything be in place to say, you know what, let's continue to try to do restoration with more time added? Is there any such thing in place?
Well, it's always good to be ambitious.
Yes.
In the case of the National Landscape Restoration Strategy, it is a plan to go up until 2030, which is a decade's worth of work that we're planning. And it also coincides with the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. Yeah. So we do have a strategy, a plan in place. And the intention now for this annual general meeting, as we're going to hear, is really to have a discussion in terms of what innovations are being executed in the region, what Belize can learn from it, because we're fairly new in terms of starting restoration. But also at the same time, the intention is to see how it is that we can engage the private sector to basically speed up, right? And see how it is that we can catalyze actions on the ground much faster than we're currently doing.
We had the latest from the Forest Department on just before you gentlemen, and they're talking about launching their strategy today. Given the initiative of the 2020, well, 20 by 20 initiative, sorry, it is to basically help to restore and to ensure that this progress is made. What are you looking at particularly for these strategies that are going to be launched today? What is it that the 20 by 20 initiative is looking for?
Thanks for having me here. So 20 by 20 is basically the Latin American initiative that came from the Bonn Challenge, as Wilber was saying. Yeah. And it's to countries in Latin America decided, you know, we need to have a Latin America initiative. And from 20 by 20, then there is another one in Africa that is called FR100. And 20 by 20 came because the idea at the beginning, as Wilber was saying, was restoring 20 million hectares by 2020. And now the ambition was raised at COP25 in Madrid, where now it's 50 million to 2030. How we can do that is challenging. Restoration, as you said, it takes time and it's a process. Basically, restoration is not the end. We want to reach an end, which is, you know, having more water, more resources for the people, more safe habitat for species, birds. Yeah. But restoration is the process to get to those points, you know, to those targets that we want. And to do that, we need investments from the public and from the private sector. From the public sector, we need incentives from the public sector to provide. And from the private sector, we need to create impact, not just financial return, but also environmental and social return. So that's what we are. And we are here in this meeting today to bring together all the organizations that are working, investors, impact investors, companies, to see, you know, what we can do to support Belize and also other countries in the region.
How is this possible with the onset of climate change?
It's challenging because, you know, we have every season, every rainy season, we have more and more problems, but at the same time we need to adapt, no? So part of restoration is not just adding more trees to the landscape, but also how we can put those trees in areas that really avoid landslides, for example, or mitigate flooding for people. So we need to, restoration is a mean to adapt to those challenges that you see. Yeah.
Okay. And then we also have with us Colin Young, Executive Director of 5Cs. Let's talk about your part in these meetings.
Good morning, listeners, viewers. It's a pleasure to be here. The 5Cs is, in this instance, is assisting the government of Belize and WRI in providing support to the conference that is being held. As well as, you know, the 5Cs, we coordinate the region's response to climate change. And one of the roles we play is helping countries to find financing to be able to implement climate resilience measures, including, in this case, restoration of landscapes. Yes. The whole idea is that you have a landscape, you think of a pasture or a degraded landscape that it used to be forest and now it's not. Yeah. And it's sitting there. And if it's in an area that we believe can add some benefits like biodiversity, like watershed management, the government then wants to restore that to some type of forest. Right. It requires resources to be able to get the trees to plant, but it's not just the planting the trees. There's a whole science behind what you're trying to do to get the resources that you need to do that. And if there's a landowner or a community that owns that land, you could think in the Belize's case, there's communal lands where you're having their community areas that are managed, and then there are public areas. And the response of those different landowners to restoration might be very different. And what they want to do with the land might not be planting back the trees. So how can we create the environment where now to make them make money from, in fact, restoring that landscape? It's a win-win for them because they get a source of payments. The forest is starting to come back, which means now that we start to have the biodiversity, which now we start to have, they're taking up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and you start to see that it can become a win-win around. However, government incentives, public policy is going to be very, very important in leading the restoration. Investors who come in to create the supply chains to make the intervention sustainable in the long term. So we are here to work with Belize and to help them achieve their mandates in terms of the outcomes that they want through partnerships and through helping to find resources for them to do it.
How has the research to understand the climate change and risk disasters that have been happening throughout the Caribbean and Latin America been like for us to come together in this meeting and create solutions to these problems?
Well, we know as I like to say, the science is no longer the problem when it comes to the issues of climate change. You know, we know that we are in the most vulnerable part of the world. We know that climate change is real. We know that the situation is going to get worse and very worse. We are on an island here in Belize that is extremely vulnerable to climate change, to sea level rise, all of those things. The science is clear. The problem is the political will. Right? We are here because of a failure of public policy, a global policy, if you will.
You're right.
So when we get the heads of the world gather at the United Nations conventions, either biodiversity or the climate change, what we are fighting for is for them to act and to do what is morally right and what is just. And we've been at this for decades, trying to get the global leaders, those who are most responsible for creating the challenges that we have now, to do more about it. And so these meetings are absolutely important because not only do we learn from each other in terms of what's happening on the ground. So while you're fighting the diplomatic battle and diplomacy and these conferences, there are also things happening now on the ground that can help make the situation better. And restoring landscapes is one of those that even while we're fighting them to say cut back on your emissions, we can still be now planting more trees, restoring systems that provide benefits.
Dr. Young, what's the problem? And I know that is a very blatant question to ask. But why is it that we're all facing these challenges globally, as you rightfully mentioned? The science is clear, as you rightfully mentioned. You say the problem is policy. Why are we not investing as a global community to making these things better? There will be nothing left if we don't try, right?
If we don't try, there will be nothing
so
left.
So what is the underlying issue?
The underlying issue is that we're not all agreed on what is the way we should proceed.
Okay.
Right? I mean, because if we were, imagine 194 countries, let's bring that to 194 of your friends. And they're saying, you know, tomorrow we want to go and eat rice and beans at Benny's restaurant, and you know, we'll have orange juice, right? If all 194 agree that that's what we're going to do, no problem. But if now you have all these different countries who are saying, no, that's not what I want to do. I think this is better aligned to what I want to do. This is more strategically important for us. And then everybody has their own ask. They hold to their own positions. In some cases, they believe that by doing certain actions, it might hurt them economically,
or, yes, financially.
And financially, or or even geopolitically, right? So that's the genesis of why we, from the small island developing states and from developing country states, say that, you know what, obviously this is a problem, we need to fix it, and you need to act now because we're running out of time.
Yeah.
And the larger countries that are responsible are slow walking the process, right? And sometimes not only slow walking the process, but blocking the achievement of certain outcomes that we all know is good. But let's make it local, right? Because let's say, for example, the Ministry of Forestry and Fisheries at one point, I believe, was also with agriculture.
Yes.
So you have a group of people in that ministry would say forestry. Obviously, you want to talk about managed forests, saving forests, not cutting it down. But then you have the agriculture folks who might very much want to cut the forest down to have beef, cattle, sheep, goat, whatever you want, right? And so those two stakeholders, the farmers, the cattle ranchers, all of these people, and the people who are trying to manage the forest, they're not always going to see eye to eye. And then the next thing you know, they'll say, wait, man, we already have so much forest already protected. You want to put more, where are we going to put the cows? So you see, so the point is that when you have these different interests that sometimes are driven by financing, by money, by politics, all of these things, what we need to try to find now is how do we bring those two entities together in such a way that there is some kind of balance between the two. And when you can find a way for both of them to benefit, then you have a higher likelihood that you're going to arrive at a solution that can help. And the solutions are often going to be local, like what I think the strategy that the chief spoke about, the 20 by 20 initiatives. When you look at where this is being done, there is actually land on the ground somewhere where communities are benefiting, private landowners are benefiting, and that's helping building a coalition of the willing, so to speak.
I mean, it brings us back to this meeting right here this week.
This is, you know, just listening to what you said, Doc, is this is a situation whereby we'll win, some folks might lose. You know, but at the same time, we must understand, and we all need to come to cooler heads by it. But I want to get back to Rene. I think one of the most important things here that we know that is very disturbing throughout the world is actually climate change. But you did mention, Rene, that one of the things that we need to do is actually we need to adapt. Let's talk about adaptation strategies, because if we want to adapt, then we need to know how to, and this needs to be implemented across countries. So what would be some of those adaptation strategies?
Yeah, no, thanks. In 20 by 20, so depending on the country, we have different threats because of the climate change. Yes. Some of the cases, hurricanes like here. In some other cases, it's just rain, too much rain in a short period of time, and that causes floodings and problems like that. And for each of these, there are different techniques that you can use nature. Like one thing could be planting trees. Another thing will be planting some crops that can stabilize the soil, so you don't have landslides. So there are different strategies, and depending on the threat or the kind of vulnerability that we are addressing, we have a variety of things that the countries are using right now for mitigating the effects. The problem, as you say, and as we are all discussing here, is carbon dioxide is the one causing the global warming. And that's mainly produced by developed countries, US, Europe, China. The problem is but the effects of climate change will be on the developing world, especially in Central America, no? And South America too, and also Africa. But Central America, it's a bridge, no? And we need to find a way for these countries to understand that we need support from them, no? To achieve. But on the same time, we need the countries also to invest in their own country, because when COVID hit, all the countries went inside, no? Yeah, the US was dealing with the American people, Europeans were dealing with European people, and we were alone. We were just alone. So if we don't invest in our country as a country, then we are basically lost, no?
And are we unified? Because I feel that's what we need to do. We need to unify voices, especially as developing countries, and then eventually try to bestow that on these countries that are developed, that are causing these emissions. So are we unified as a people? In Central America, Caribbean, do we see unification here?
Well, I think when it comes to some of the, from a climate change point of view and from a climate negotiations point of view, we are very aligned and unified. We all agree, I think Central America, like the Caribbean, is one of the most vulnerable areas in the world to the effects of climate change. The disasters obviously not only impact lives and livelihoods, but they're largely responsible for the debt that a lot of our countries have. We are countries with very high rates of poverty. And as a result of all of those things, the countries often, and I can say this from the climate change negotiations, when you listen to the heads of government from the Central American countries, Latin American countries, and when you listen to the heads of government of CARICOM member states, you're hearing they're saying, look, you need to act now. We're running out of time. We need financing to help our people adapt and to help transition our economies to renewable energy. We need to be able to get concessional resources to help us rebuild from the constant onslaught of climate disasters. Yeah. So those things were absolutely aligned. When it comes to the forests and the benefits that forests provide, both to people and communities, as well as to the world because of its mitigation services that forests provide, again, you will find the unification. However, all of this comes back to the fact that governments have to provide services to their people. The services that they provide is different based on where people are and what resources are there. And in some cases, governments will say, if that forest contains resources that I can use now to help people with jobs and provide critical services, then I may very well want to take those resources out. And then you might have people saying, well, but if the forest is worth more standing, so let's try to work on keeping the forest there. And so the question then is, how can we make that work so that the benefits of keeping the forest does not mean that the persons who wanted to take the stuff out of it is not worse off?
Yeah.
But what you see the study unification is in principle, it works very well. But at the end of the day, on the ground, there are stakeholders with different interests. And you have to try to manage and balance those interests in a way that everybody wins.
But it brings us back to the Bonn challenge, right? 61 countries have committed to doing this, right? How are we as different stakeholders, particularly in Belize and small developing states, are managing and also holding other countries accountable to making their pledges?
Well, when we speak restoration, it cannot be, as Dr. Young said, zero-sum game.
Right.
You must have a situation where we have win-win, especially with the two sectors that do conservation and management and the productive sector. How do we have that intersectoral dialogue? Once, obviously, we've laid out the policy environment, to have that discussion in terms of how do we create that proverbial balance between having to ensure food security, but also being able to provide the ecosystem services, your clean water, your clean air, you know, all of the things that we in Belize, for instance, take for granted.
Yeah.
So what the landscape restoration strategy from our end is saying, let's look at restoration as a land management tool. We aren't talking about locking off areas of land and putting it for conservation or protected area status.
Yeah.
How do we create that that link between ensuring soil conservation, water security, watershed management, and as well increasing productivity in these areas that are under production, but also at the same time ensuring that, you know, our precious jaguar, for instance, is able to traverse the agro-productive landscape from one point to the next. How the birds and the bees can, you know, continue to provide their pollination services and us create that habitat, that environment for them to be able to persist. And so the landscape restoration strategy is our blueprint as a responsible country, as a party to all these different conventions, to be able to deliver. And so we are not the only country that has developed its strategy. The strategies are a response to the Bonn challenge and our own local challenges that we know we need to meet. So from our end, we have the blueprint. Now the next critical step is seeing how we can have the local investment, external private investment. How do we capitalize on the natural capital that's there? Yeah. So these are the different innovations that we expect from the discussions that we will have today and tomorrow to have us learn. Yeah. Why reinvent the wheel? Yeah. So that is the platform, that is the dialogue that we want to continue, because the annual general meetings of Initiative 20 by 20, you know, they've been ongoing every year. But for us, it is a very good platform for us to show what it is that we are doing, what we plan to do, and how it is that we can engage.
What are we hoping to achieve at the end of this week?
First of all, the launch of the National Landscape Restoration Strategy. Yes. It's been literally a labor of love. COVID threw a very, very major hiccup in our plans. And really it is to say that the strategy and through our consultations with the various stakeholders, including the productive sector, that we can actually move to restore 130,000 hectares within the next 10 years. Yeah. And if we can have at least one private sector investor approaching us, that they're willing to invest in our strategy, in our plans, that would, you know, be a good achievement for us. Yeah. And
throwing in that same question to you, Rene, what's the hope coming out of this week-long meeting?
So we have a technical component on the meeting, so we will cover different topics from carbon markets, policy, NDCs, which is the commitments we have for the Paris Agreement on climate change. And what we are hoping is that technical partners can agree on how we can better support, unify each of the countries in the region. Because we have many organizations. My organization is the World Resources Institute, is supporting some of the countries, but then there is IUCN, there is TNC. There are many organizations that have a lot of areas that they can support, but instead of competing between each other, what we are looking here in this meeting is that we agree on if Belize needs more investments, how we can, the three organizations, encourage those investments, for example. That's what we are hoping here, because we are in a race, no? And we need to maximize resources and minimize costs, and that's what we are hoping, reaching agreements with the organizations like 5Cs too.
Doc, are we too late? Is that a loaded question?
Yeah, okay. Well, are we too late? You know, if the answer to that question is yes, then then why
are we here?
Right? So, you know, I'm an optimist, and I think everybody at these meetings are optimists. Is that we know that we don't have a lot of time, and we have to ramp up our efforts, and especially in those areas that we can control. Right? There are certain things that are beyond our control, meaning at the individual level, but also at the policy and national levels, because there are certain things that require global concerted effort. So I don't think we're too late. We have to continue to do the work that is being done. And there's a lot of really good work that is being done in Belize and across the region that we need to scale up, while at the same time continue to hold those responsible to do more and to do it fast.
All right. We do hope that you know, we get the best, especially you know, our sister nations get the best out of the meeting. Continue to unify voices so that the bigger countries or larger countries could understand exactly where we're coming from, and then we move to a level playing field. Guys, we want to thank you for joining us this morning. Very fruitful conversation, and here's to wishing you all the very best.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
And John, with that, we're taking our final break. We'll be back for wrap-up. Stay tuned.